Hey YouTube, this is Archangel for Truth. Today I am talking to you folks about anti-sovereigns. Now, why I'm talking about this group of people is because they are really a lost people. They do not understand the implications of sovereignty. They do not understand their inalienable rights and freedoms. And these are individuals that are often anti-sovereign, not just from the standpoint of the principles, but they're against individuals who choose not to be part of their system of enslavement. So these are the issues that I wish to discuss in this particular video. But in order for us to understand what are inalienable rights and what is sovereignty, we need to understand how this nation established it for itself. So we know that the King of England decided to impose certain laws and taxation upon the settlers that were amongst the founding fathers of this nation. And they began to feel like the King of England was riding roughshod over their inalienable rights, their sovereign rights. And so they chose to not to follow those laws or those taxations that the King of England imposed upon them. So whenever you get an anti-sovereign trying to debate a sovereign and trying to say, well, y'all don't follow any laws because you're not being subject to the laws that we're saying that you have to follow. Well, guess what? Anti-sovereign. The same was true for the founding fathers. And yet there were settlers that existed that didn't want to buck the system, that were very willing, like you are, to be subservient to the will of the king and be obedient to his laws and taxation. And had they had their way, this nation would have never been established. At least not as a separate and sovereign state or government. So the founding fathers, when they decided they had had enough of the King of England, they chose to write to the king a letter. We call that letter the Declaration of Independence. This document is very important, and I would argue equally as important as the Constitution itself, because it was the basis of which this nation was founded. And because of it, there are certain doctrines established at the very outset of this nation. But in order for us to understand what those are, we need to actually see what the Declaration of Independence actually says. So I will read it and share with you what the Declaration of Independence has to say. It says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." Now, before I continue on, I want to address something here. It says that the purpose of government is to secure the rights of people. That is the reason why the government was established. It was not created for other purposes except for this purpose. There is also here what the Declaration of Independence says, that the powers that this government has, the government are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the people. So, without the consent of the people, the government's powers would not be just. And so this is very important because it establishes the doctrine called the consent of the governed. And what this means is that in order for the powers of the government to have its authority, it must have your consent. And without it, its powers are no different than the King of England himself in the way it would govern as authority over you. But it continues that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, to what ends? Well, to the destructive of the ends of what is being protected: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So when government has become so expansive in its reach that it now is infringing upon your life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, then the Declaration of Independence is actually saying that when it becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light or transit causes. So this is also very important because we don't want a government that is wishy-washy or is not something that is well-founded. It is important that government be well founded, but it must be well founded on the principles that it is established on, its foundation, the foundation of your rights, your freedoms, inalienable rights. But for anti-sovereigns, I find that the far majority will deny inalienable rights. They will deny the consent of the governed. They will say you are under obligation to fulfill whatever the government's will is, even if you should not consent. So, what I'm not saying is, I'm not saying that there should not be any form of government, but the government that we would want to consent to is that government which represents our interests, our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. If our government is no longer doing that, we have the right to abolish the government and establish a government that we feel best suits our rights and freedoms. So this goes out to all of you anti-sovereigns out there. I consider myself as a sovereign constitutionalist. I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the Bill of Rights. But I also believe that this government, in order for its just powers to exist over me, that it requires my consent. That's what the Declaration of Independence established, and certainly the Founding Fathers did not comply with the King of England's laws and taxation because they agreed with that as well. So how is it that you agree with the King, or you agree with the Founding Fathers rejecting the laws of the King of England, but then say to sovereigns that they're wrong for rejecting a government that has breached its limits, its enumerated limitations? So our freedom is inherent to our humanity. It is a gift given to us by God. We are sovereign because God made us to be sovereign. It is not for the government to limit our rights, to deny or to disparage our rights, to say that we don't have certain rights, to convert rights into regulations, or to call them privileges. The government was not founded for the purpose of establishing privileges. It was founded to secure rights. And until you anti-sovereigns understand that, regardless of whatever regulation you want to throw out, whatever judicial decision you want to throw out, it doesn't matter. Because there's still the right not to consent, as is and was established in the Declaration of Independence and by the Founding Fathers themselves, who did not consent to the King of England. So I don't hate people, and even anti-sovereigns who will often revert to name calling and disrespectful postings and so forth. I invite you anti-sovereigns to get your head out of the ass of the government, because we have rights that the government does not have. Their powers are enumerated. Our rights are unenumerated, and they are extensive beyond the Constitution. With that, I say, God bless you all, and take care.